Hi, I'm Narayan Naik, a professor of finance at the London Business School. I joined in summer of 1991, and over the last 3 decades, I have looked at various issues that affect communities at large or people at large, starting from the big bang of the London Stock Exchange, which transformed the trading, to hedge fund investing, how active management adds value, keeps prices efficient, and more recently about climate and how one can come up with structures and ideas which can slow down the global warming that is taking place. And in that connection, I was talking to our alumnus, Sanmit, Ahuja.
Narayan, thank you so much for having me back at the school. 20 years on, 20 years on. It's been lovely to be back here. And thanks to the Wheeler Institute of Business and Development for hosting this particular dialogue. You and I have been speaking about climate finance over the last few months, and I'm so delighted that the school's decided to have a little dialogue on air, on camera, for the benefit of the existing students and the wider community. But thanks for having me again.
As we all know, greenhouse emissions are causing the climate change that is taking place. So Sanmit is an expert in that area from the technology point of view, from the causes and the various aspects of costing, etc. And we got going saying, how can we use my knowledge of financial instruments and structures and trading systems which can mobilize capital, essentially either from the sovereign wealth funds or institutional investors or family offices or socially conscious investors, as to how we can support slowing down of this climate warming, global warming that is taking place. So in that connection, we got going and we are on the same wavelength. So over to Sanmit to tell us as to how you think about it, what are the problems, what can be done.
So I'd start with the attributability, right? I think, or climate denialism, as a lot of people call. I think we're beyond that point where there's enough scientific data and evidence out there to kind of put a marker on the fact that climate change is real and it's man-made, or humanity caused it, right? And for decades, as the world has been industrializing, right, we've been emitting the greenhouse gases, and now we've started to realize, oh God, that the gas chamber, the greenhouse gas chamber that's kind of enveloped the Earth, is increasing temperatures. So in the last few decades, the temperature has increased. We're seeing the incidence of that manifesting in droughts, in floods, in hurricanes, in heat waves. Last year, New Delhi had a heat wave of 52 degrees. We've seen huge inflationary pressures because of increase in input costs, energy costs, cost of money going up, and that slows down the economy. And it brings out a very, very important issue, which is who pays for climate change, right?
That's true.
At the end of the day, someone's got to pay for it. Now, we can't deindustrialize our past growth. To keep moving forward, we need to find new levers, new instruments. So I'll just give you an example. The world's super excited about artificial intelligence, AI, sort of kicking in, and every other startup is focused on AI in some shape or form. Now, behind the scenes, if you look at the energy consumption patterns or energy consumption rate of artificial intelligence searches, so if you do a normal web search versus if you put a command in AI, the AI engine consumes 10 times more power.
Because it is searching across a library of databases.
Exactly. So the data centers, which are big power guzzlers and energy guzzlers, the incidence rate of data centers or installation rate of data centers will increase massively. The negative externalities linked to carbon, they are not being priced in. And that's the worry the central bank governors have, that how do we solve the aspect of who pays for climate change. At the moment, the ask is about $200 trillion.
Say that again.
$200 trillion is the ask for the world to decarbonize by 2050 That's the volume of money. That's the quantum of money we need. And to a common person, it's it's beyond imagination, right? Where will this money come from? Those of us who are working in the finance sector, in the banking sector, we also worry like where will this money come from? Ultimately, it's the carbon tax that will have to pay for it, because there's no better instrument than paying for consumption. But again, I come back to the worry that bank governors have, that if you bring more taxation, right, then the economies will struggle to grow when they are wanting to kickstart demand and kickstart growth.
Yes. And very interesting you mentioned about the Delhi example and loss of person days, man days, whatever we may call it. Flash floods I have seen in countries washing away bridges and the roads and infrastructure, which is the backbone of development. And reinstalling those is another cost, which is if the climate was not so adverse, this would not have happened. Let alone the destruction through wars and all these activities that are going on.
Yeah. This does not come out very often, but the levels of uninsured risk is at all-time high. Right? Many insurance companies, for regions in California, elsewhere, there's incidents of fires, they've stopped insuring homes.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And which means people are taking, completely naked exposure to the adversities of climate and nature. But back to the flood incidence rates or hurricane rates, these to internalize the insurance cost, to internalize the cost of rebuilding, right? That kind of money does not exist.
On that point, Sanmit, the bushfires in Australia, the survivors successfully sued the government for their inability to protect them and mitigate these fires. So we have a legal incident where the responsibility of these events or containing these events or mitigating these events lies with the government. And that is another issue that the central bank governor is worrying about. Where do I get money for those precautionary measures? May it be floods or may it be barriers for rivers that we talk about in the UK, where it overflows the banks and then gets into the villages and townships.
And the reason, Narayan, central bank governors and those who manage the fiscal policies are worried about where do we find the money is because we're looking at climate in a very wrong way. We're looking at it as a liability. But if we flip the model on its head and see it as a major economic opportunity, then that window to capital pools open up. I mentioned $200 trillion, and that's over the next 35 odd years. At the moment, the global institutional finance, right, the assets under management in that category is about $140 trillion.
Interesting.
But $140 trillion is being managed by asset managers worldwide. But less than 2% or less than 3% of that is allocated towards ESG, environment, social governance.
That's too small a fraction.
Too small a fraction. And the reason is because we're seeing environment as a liability. There are skewed benefits that get accorded or afforded by certain asset classes or certain money managers, and those monies do not flow back to where they're needed. So, for instance, when we talk of carbon finance and carbon taxes, less than a quarter of global emissions are covered under any carbon financing scheme or emissions trading scheme. Right? Less than a quarter.
Tiny.
Right? And that's tiny. And we've seen the voluntary post-Kyoto protocol, because there was a hiatus, there was no real global carbon trading scheme. The voluntary markets kicked in, but the voluntary markets itself have had a loss of trust, loss of faith, only because many of the credits that were being put on the market or being traded did not have the underlying value that they purported. It did not deliver what it said on the tin. So this is a function of, now I'm not worried about that happening. Of course, the loss of capital in any form or for anyone is not good, but this is a mark of a market that's trying to stand up. Eventually, we have to move to a compliance market in every country.
Yes.
So if we bring 100% or near 100% of emissions under a compliance and a regulatory norm, then that taxation scheme can be more efficient. Of course, we'll have to look at interoperability between the EU scheme or the UK scheme or India's scheme as and when it comes up. But notwithstanding that, by bringing more and more emissions under a trading scheme, we'll be able to create tradable securities.
That's true.
Right? To which the institutional finance can back. But until that happens, we have to find what I call transition economic levers, right?
Yes, yes.
Because those levers are available today. We cannot live in a binary world that when that money market kicks in or carbon market kicks in, we'll enter start allocating capital then. So in summary, those levers are, number one, the cost of technology, right?
And can you elaborate on that?
So technology, there's 85% of the climate problems that the technologies that will solve those problems exist today, right?
Okay.
So it's not inventing those technology, which takes decades to do the R&D and then commercialize those solutions. For most of the challenges that the world is facing, the solutions exist today. That's number one. Lever number two is market making, right? Because we're entering an era where the output of these solutions, whether it's renewable energy or green hydrogen or biofuels or biogas, there has to be a buyer. Now, the buyers are largely distributed. They could be small retail buyers or large whole-scale industrial buyers, but there is no single buyer of these outputs. And lack of markets do not instill faith and confidence and trust, and as a result, money does not follow. And the final lever that we'll talk about is cost of finance and availability of finance. Many of the emerging markets struggle to tap into the $200 trillion,
Yes.
or $140 trillion. So availability of capital is a critical concern, but so is the cost of money, and that's where blended finance comes into play. So these are the three levers that are available to us today, and will help us transition to a point when the carbon pricing and carbon tax regime kicks in.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, many of these solutions that are coming out hit a brick wall the moment we talk about industrial absorption of these solutions, particularly when they're going to the emerging markets, right? The solutions are designed, give you an example, there's a farming solution designed out of Japan which uses 90% less water, right?
For a rice crop?
No, for growing anything that grows on a vine or a shrub. But 90% less consumption in water, and most importantly, you don't need land or soil to grow food. You grow food on a membrane.
Yes.
So now,
So is that what they call the hydroponic?
Yeah, so it's an advanced version of hydroponics.
Okay.
Or it's called membrane farming. Now, the challenge was, how do you bring a solution that is designed in a Japanese economic context?
Yes.
To work in Cambodia, in South Africa, in an Indian economic context, right? The affordability was just not there. We looked at a green hydrogen solution, electrolyzer solution going from Canada, and again, the affordability is not there in emerging markets. So whilst I'm seeing a lot of investments going in climate tech as an asset class, the market size is notional, right? So when companies are inventing these technologies, they're thinking global carbon problem, global climate problem, but they're not segmenting the markets as they are. So they're being designed in a developed world context but the application in an emerging market context, the demand is higher.
Yes.
However, the transferability
Is minimal.
Is absolutely minimal. So my submission to a lot of the venture capital industry players and the companies who are the investee companies in this sector, that if you don't design right from the outset your business or commercialization model for two economic contexts,
Yes.
the developed world context and the developing world context, you will struggle to bring the markets. So the answer is finding systems integrators in the emerging markets, and there's enough engineering talent. Look at every major industrial group. They all have their global capability centers, research centers, R&D centers now spread across the
Developing markets.
developing markets. India is a great example of that. So
Yes.
so if a lot of R&D and innovations already happening in those countries, why can't system engineering and system integration also? So I would say, a new asset class and a new structure has to come out. The new structure being the systems integration happening in emerging markets. The asset class then is the first of a kind. So because someone has to invest in setting up that first of a kind commercial demonstration in emerging markets, right? So if you have these two instruments available to you, the instrument and the structure available to you, the acceleration rate increases, and that's when many of these technologies, which are still sitting in Series A funded solution category, but not having enough commercial demonstration sites,
they become economically viable at that scale level.
We are seeing the emergence of global hotspots of systems integration, like so India being one, Brazil's coming on the curve very, very quickly. There are many other countries that are also climbing up the ladder of building this capability to partner with the developed world and say, your IP is safe, your IP is secure, we will do the systems integration, and we will not only bring the market, we'll also be springboard to other other emerging market economies. So that's your lever number one, which is make the cost of technology affordable. So I say increase the accessibility, the affordability, and availability of the technologies. And that's your lever number one in our battle against climate change.
And with that hotspot, I see it in a positive sense here, though in other contexts it may have negative connotation. I know you meant the positive one. And looking at those examples, may it be India, may it be Brazil, may it be South Africa, the neighboring nations will start getting more confident about its ability and applicability and accessibility. So you can spread it beyond those country boundaries.
Correct.
Which will benefit a wider population and wider range of emerging markets, developing markets.
Absolutely.
What is the life cycle, in the sense you have an idea, you have entrepreneurs with ideas, but not enough capital. And there are people who have capital but don't have the ideas. And rightfully so, there is some skepticism between the two. The entrepreneur is always bullish about it, while the investor, having burnt his or her fingers in the previous ventures, is a bit cautious. So how does that work?
The physical engineering world, is where the real venture capital money is needed. And many of the companies who have been successful in tapping that are unable to bring or commercialize the technologies fast enough because the check sizes are very large. Who are these market maker entities or agencies or structures? So essentially, the government would establish a market maker and say, on one side, it will give 10-year plus offtake agreements, guaranteed buyback agreements to the producers.
At a fixed price?
At a fixed price.
Or a price determined as
price determined according to a formula. Volumes determined according to a formula, and the delivery or tenor or the volume offtake determined according to a formula which is pre-agreed. And then on the other side, its job is to encourage more and more companies to buy green hydrogen. Now the companies would say, look, if the cost is not affordable, why would I buy this? So you bring another instrument, which is called a commodity fund, which is backed by, again, I go back to carbon pricing, which backed by some of the government subsidies that are available, or long issue, long dated bonds. So government can spread the cost of the delta between the green and the gray over 10, 20, 30 years in order to jumpstart the market. Right? So if you narrow this bridge between the green and the gray, then the banks are happy that to lend to that particular project, because there is an entity in the middle, which is, let's say, a AAA rated entity,
Yes.
with a strong sovereign and government backstop, and its job is to tap into, global capital pool. Cost of money for the government will always be lower
Sure.
than cost of money for the corporations. So this market maker is one such structure and lever that we should use for all types of commodities we're trying to, whether it's cheap electricity, or green ammonia, or green hydrogen, or green fertilizer, or biofuels. So market makers as a structure is an extremely important framework and a lever we should utilize.
So you need a trustworthy centralized aggregator
Absolutely.
between the consumers and the producers,
Sure.
which gives comfort to third parties, which facilitate, like the banks.
Exactly.
So it makes it bankable, in the sense acceptable for them to bear that risk.
Yeah.
Some risks will remain, but a major part of
that risk.
revenue risk is mitigated.
In India, you have the Solar Energy Corporation of India, SECI as we call it, and that became the market maker for most of the renewable energy that's produced in the country, but now is also becoming a market maker for green
Other technologies.
other solutions, right? And
Interesting.
there are enough precedences and structures available around the world, but the governments have to signal the jumpstart of the market by establishing a market maker and not just a policy.
Very true, very true. And so you need the AAA rating, high credit worthiness, or deep pockets, which comes only at a government level, not necessarily at a corporation level.
Exactly.
The next step is the financing aspect of it. And from what we know, in a new technology life cycle, initially the risks are of different kinds. This technology risk, there is manufacturing risk, production risk. Then once that is sorted or addressed, and you get a minimum viable product, then of course the scaling up takes place and the risk takes a different form. And then once the technology becomes more well established and widely available, it gets de-risked, so it becomes less, and the lenders become more comfortable, and then it takes off, and then it becomes a commoditized product. So could you take us through, during this life cycle of a new technology, what kind of finance is required, or how costly it is at different points in time? Clearly, initially the risk is high, of a different nature, and then it kind of becomes less and less, and then there are certain risks which are all pervading.
The final frontier, or the third lever that we speak about, is the cost of money itself, right?
Yes.
Very simply put it in the analogy that you talk of, buying a house, right? If my credit rating is good, I will have access to more lenders who are happy to give me money at even a cheaper mortgage rate, right? And the same analogy kind of extends to the infrastructure sector as well, that if my risks are less, my credit rating of the project is good, then more and more lenders will come in. Now that's okay for markets which are deep enough, where liquidity is not a challenge, where capital markets are functioning, bond markets are deep, and you can tap into money markets worldwide. Not true for emerging market economies, right? Or of course there are layers and gradients. So India is fairly advanced. Many other economies are still fairly advanced, but many aren't, and the least developed nations are not able to access the capital easily. So blended finance is the sort of third lever that we recommend should be used and should become a norm, not just an exception. Now, what is blended finance? So blended finance really is bringing two sources of capital. One which has a developmental nature or flavor to it, so capital coming from the sovereign or the governments, capital coming from development finance institutions like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, and many others, and capital coming from the philanthropic organizations. And you blend that with capital coming from the commercial segments, whether it's family offices, private equity,
pension funds,
any one of those. And the overall effect is that the cost of money is cheaper. Now, if we want the absorption or adoption of green technologies to happen faster, we need to make the projects, we need to make this capital, cheaper capital available to the projects. So you blend the two sources of capital together, so the overall effect, net effect on cost of money is positive and makes a project
affordable.
Makes a project
viable,
affordable, bankable, investable, whatever adjective that you want to use.
How can you elaborate on that as to how these are available and what kind of path will they take?
If the cost of money to a corporate was 5% or 6% here, and there was FX hedging available as an insurance or a safety net for an investor, the monies would be available to an Indian project developer at about 8%, 8.5% in the local currency.
Yes.
Which is a lot cheaper than the 11.5% that they are currently borrowing at. So that 3% differential is huge when apply over a 15 or 20 year period, right? And it translates into more affordable green energy or green hydrogen as a commodity coming out. Now, how do you develop or create the pipes that link the project developers in India or any other emerging market to the global institutional finance? So we're suggesting a number of structures, but the most important structure, interesting structure, is establishing a feeder fund.
Okay.
Now, feeder funds are funds which are aggregation vehicles listed on stock exchanges like London Stock Exchange or New York Stock Exchange or any others,
which are well regulated and compliance protected. So investors have a degree of confidence.
Highly regulated, right? Extremely solid governance. The reason they're not channeling money either into climate or, more relevantly, climate and emerging markets context is because that underlying asset class is not endowed with value, and there are a number of inherent risks. So we've now discussed the three levers that we utilize to both reduce the risk as well as reduce the cost of money. In our assessment and in our discussions with a lot of the project developers, they're saying, look, if we are able to sell the project to the investment trust and eventually to the feeder fund, it can unlock enough money for us to go and deploy 2 or 3 more projects. Right? So the capacity creation just amplifies massively, right? So a feeder fund listed on a regulated stock exchange down to an investment trust which aggregates a lot of the operating assets, right? And that's the channel how which you tap into the global money market.
And the operators of that operating asset, which is already operational and functional, create a track record of establishing this technology, which works the way it is expected. The efficiency is there, the volume is there, the output is there, the quality is there. So for their subsequent projects, they have a track record, so that can make capital much more easily available to them because they are kind of serial entrepreneurs and they have proven themselves. So people are more comfortable. So and that kind of builds on their ability to scale up much more efficiently.
To scale up.
On that note, thank you to the Wheeler Institute of the London Business School for giving this platform for you to release the new approaches to climate finance, models for the global south. We launched it last week, to be precise, 25th of September evening at the London Business School as a strategic think piece, and it will be available through a well-known website. So those who are interested are welcome to, and the link will be available on the Wheeler Institute. Thank you, Sanmit, for this.
Narayan. And thanks to London Business School and the Wheeler Institute of
pleasure.
Business and
Our
Development for
pleasure.
having me. Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.